report.
Tonight, the Albanese government's amazing decision to bury these Taipan helicopters rather than let Ukraine have them. I mean, the excuses made today by this government make no sense at all. And the question grows, how incompetent is the Albanese government? Or is it weak? Foreign Minister Penny Wong's trip to Israel gets even more controversial, visiting sites of alleged Jewish crimes, but not sites where Jews were actually massacred. Also tonight, Woolies won't celebrate Australia Day, but it does celebrate now the Chinese Lunar New Year. Plus the problem with Brittany Higgins, new photos from a hideaway in France by the government will hate them. And my Thursday tips, including a whiskey, but of course, and one every oyster eater will love. But first, two developments that underline how dangerous and reckless China now is, and how very, very deadly. Just 4 years after the COVID-19 virus escaped from a Chinese laboratory, as now seems almost certain, a Chinese-made virus escaped from a government laboratory. Let's not muck around with that. 4 years later, Chinese scientists say they have made a new virus that could be even deadlier. I mean, this is incredible. These scientists from the Beijing Advanced Innovation Center for Soft Matter Science and Engineering have published a preprint that they say, which says they created a virus related to COVID-19, developed from pangolins, that has caused 100% mortality in human transgenic mice, killed them all within 10 days, probably through brain infections, although tore through their whole bodies. And infection rate of 100%, that is something unusual. Scientists around the world are stunned. For instance, Gennady Glinsky, a retired professor of genomics at Stanford University, said this madness must be stopped. The director of London's UCL Genetics Institute tweeted that it was a terrible study, scientifically totally pointless. I can see nothing of vague interest that could be learned from force infecting a weird breed of humanized mice with a random virus. Conversely, I could see how such stuff might go wrong. And haven't we seen that already? I mean, that COVID-19 virus, apparently engineered by scientists to become more deadly, is now widely suspected of having escaped from China's Wuhan Institute of Virology. So far killed 9 million people around the world, with China refusing to cooperate fully with investigators trying to find out exactly how this occurred. And now fresh evidence, so we're told. This is the second one that China was covering up. The Wall Street Journal has gone through documents uncovered by the US Department of Health and a House Committee of Congress and found that a Chinese researcher had mapped and isolated the original COVID-19 virus 2 weeks before China told the world in 2020 it was on the loose. 2 weeks we could have had to prepare, 2 extra weeks, maybe to stop flights, stop the spread. Now, that researcher, Dr. Lili Ren of the Beijing-based Institute of Pathogen Biology, had uploaded the nearly complete DNA sequence of this new COVID, onto GenBank, which stores genetic sequences for America's National Institutes of Health. But when officials asked for more information, didn't get back to them, and this whole thing got deleted. China was meanwhile telling the world that this outbreak it had in Wuhan, just a viral pneumonia of unknown cause, still checking it out. Now, actually, to be frank, despite the big headlines this is making around the world, not actually new news. It's been noted before in scientific debates. That said, it is important to be reminded, because this evidence suggests again, China did know about this virus a fortnight before it told the world, and the world paid a terrible price for China staying silent. Let alone China working on deadly viruses like this, and the dictatorship is now working on a virus that could prove even deadlier? Why is that? And how safe are we from a dictatorship that just won't answer questions like that? But to another thing, the Albanese government. It's getting now that's a reputation for doing crazy things that it can't explain, like the voice debacle, or releasing foreign criminals into the community without making sure we're safe, or importing 540,000 immigrants in just 1 year, and without the housing for them all. But there's one thing it's done that could beat them all for sheer, inexplicable stupidity. Decided to bury 45 Taipan helicopters. It's just grounded rather than let Ukraine have them in its war with Russia. And I defy anyone to explain this. Certainly the Prime Minister today couldn't. Once again, no leadership, just pass the buck down the food chain.
We take advice from the Department of Defence on these matters.
Actually, Prime Minister, this is your call not to send them to Ukraine. The government grounded these helicopters last year after one crash, killing 4 servicemen on board. It decided there might be a fault with them. While the inquiry is going, why take the risk, the expense of keeping them flying, when we've in fact got new Black Hawk helicopters coming anyway? So Ukraine heard about all this, and its Chief of Defence Intelligence wrote 1 month ago to our Defence Minister, Richard Marles, asking to have these choppers, since we didn't want them. He said, "Our wounded are dying unnecessarily on the front because we cannot get them from the front to emergency care fast enough. We do not have helicopters that can rapidly deploy and evacuate our wounded." Do you know, 1 month on, this government still has not given Ukraine an answer. 1 month. Instead, it quietly went ahead with plans to strip those helicopters of spare parts and then bury the frames in the ground. Supporters of Ukraine are protesting what looks like sheer bureaucratic bastardry, laziness. I've got no explanation. And Defence Industries Minister Pat Conroy today, when he was asked for an explanation, seemed to make no sense at all. I mean, why couldn't Ukraine have helicopters we don't want?
And we do not know whether they're safe to fly. Secondly, to get them into a condition to provide to the Ukrainian government would require considerable taxpayers' expense and time and resources.
I mean, seriously, 2 things about that. First, the helicopters aren't safe. Well, maybe we let Ukraine be the arbiter of that. But look, in fact, the black box from that crash last year found no fault with the chopper. And other air forces are flying Taipans. If there was a real problem with them, they'd all have grounded them. And surely it is up to Ukraine to decide if they are too unsafe to fly. If it's too unsafe to fly the choppers, and let those injured die on the ground on the battlefield. That's a call that it can make. And how much would it really cost us to send them to the Ukrainians? How much is it going to cost us instead to bury them here, you know, in that environmentally approved, traditional owner approved and monitored and all testing, all leakage? How much would that cost us instead? What is this government thinking? Joining me is Peter Jennings. Now, he's had many national security jobs, including Deputy Secretary for Strategy in the Defence Department. He's now Director of Strategic Analysis Australia, former head of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Peter Jennings, great to have you on board. Listen, the government is saying it would rather bury these helicopters than let Ukraine have them. What part of that don't I understand?
The same part I don't understand. It's mystifying. It's one of the most puzzling decisions I've seen a government make in national security. And I've been in the business for over 30 years, Andrew. It's bizarre. And I think, frankly, the government is overplaying this issue of safety. It was very strange to have the helicopters permanently grounded after that tragic fatal accident. When 2 Black Hawk helicopters crashed 20 years ago, killing 18 people, the Black Hawk was up in the sky operating very, very quickly thereafter. That's what Defence forces do. What we have here is some very lengthy investigations, which will probably take months to complete, which I think are being used as a sort of a cover to justify a completely unjustifiable decision, which is to say we could have provided those airframes to the Ukrainians. They could have been supported by other European countries, many of whom are flying Taipan helicopters or their equivalent right now. This decision is mystifying. It's the worst possible outcome. It's left our own forces lacking a helicopter capability that they need because the Black Hawks are not yet in service. This needs to be investigated. There needs to be some sort of parliamentary inquiry into what actually happened here, who was advising what to whom.
Look, the unsafe. We're agreed. The safety argument is rubbish. I mean, for one, it's for Ukraine to decide whether it's too safe, right? Too unsafe, and two, as you say, there's no link between the safety and the crash last year. We don't know. We simply don't know. So it seems to me just an excuse. I don't know what it is. Have you got any idea about what's really going on here? I mean, is there a hidden reason that they're not telling us, or is this sheer bastardry or stupidity, or could there be another reason?
Well, I'll enter into speculation here because I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect that what Defence has been most concerned about was that it didn't want to wear the cost of getting the airframes over to Ukraine. And that's because the Albanese government told Defence several months ago now that any equipment that we were going to provide to Ukraine was actually going to come out of the Defence budget. And it may well be the case that Defence concluded that the cheapest thing to do for its own interests was to bury these things rather than to bear the brunt of paying what would be some millions of dollars, I guess, to have them crated up and sent over to Ukraine. That's the best that I can come up with, Andrew, is that things in this town usually revolve around money. And that may well have something to do with the outcome that we have here. The other thing that I think is worth pointing out from Pat Conroy's talk today was he said, well, we spent a couple of months looking to find potential purchasers. And I just make the point here, there is no government in the world which in the space of 8 or 10 weeks is going to come up with $1 billion to buy 55 airframes. It just doesn't happen that quickly. And the eagerness with which Defence then moved to start to disassemble these platforms strikes me as very strange indeed. And again, light needs to be shed on this. We need to get to the bottom of what happened here.
Look, I think your theory might be correct, which just throws the spotlight back on the Prime Minister. He said today, I'm just acting on Defence advice. No, it's the Prime Minister's call to say, look, the money for sending them over there comes to the Defence Department. That's his call. And it's also his call not to fund it. It's all on him, isn't it? I mean, it's an abrogation of his responsibility to just blame the army.
Absolutely. And, we don't elect governments in order to acquiesce and take stupid advice from any public service department or indeed the Australian Defence Force. They need to think for themselves. That's why ministers are there. Otherwise, we could replace them with, I guess, an artificial intelligence program or something of that nature. What it shows you, though, is that the Prime Minister is just not engaged on this topic. He doesn't seem to be across it. That says to me, was it actually discussed in the National Security Committee of Cabinet? You'd think a decision to actually break up $1 billion worth of helicopters was something that would have been discussed at the National Security Committee of Cabinet. I'm guessing that it might not have been.
But hello, how can that be? I mean, we are talking about a really serious thing. It's not just what do we do with $1 billion of a helicopter. It's not just that. It's also talking about aid to a country that desperately needs us, proving that we are worthy world citizens in the fight for democracy, because we will need these people, help ourselves to defend ourselves if everything hits the fan, say, with China. It just is one of the most bizarre things for a Prime Minister not to get involved in.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's worth also saying, Andrew, that the loss of this capability in the defence world, it's known as battlefield lift capability, was a decision taken several months before we started the flood season and the bushfire season, cyclone season through the South Pacific, where these helicopters would have a use. They also provide the fast response capability for the counter-terrorist teams that operate on the East Coast and the West Coast of Australia if there's a terrorism incident. We do not have that capability right now. The Black Hawk helicopters, which we're acquiring to replace the Taipans, there's only 3 in country right now, and they've not yet been accepted into military service. So, consciously or not, the government took a decision to say we will simply not have this helicopter capability for an unspecified period of time. They don't know when the Black Hawks are going to be all right for service. So there's a domestic consequence. It limits our ability to do things like if we needed to go up to Papua New Guinea last week because of the rioting, happily we didn't need to, but if we needed to, it would have been a very useful capability to get around Port Moresby. There's the counter-terrorism dimension, there's the Ukraine dimension, and just the sheer dumbness of wasting an asset that might be useful on the second-hand market a year or two from now, but deciding after 8 or 10 weeks that that was not something to be taken seriously. This needs investigation. I have to repeat the point. It's one of the silliest decisions I've seen a government make.
I know. If they just explained it was something rational and didn't treat the whole nation like idiots, we could have a debate. But this is just insane. Peter Jennings, thank you so much for your time. I've got to interrupt here because one of the themes I've been pushing for a while, right? The rise of the new primitivism, the new tribalism. It's not just here. The West being ashamed of its culture, like the science and the reason that made us all rich. Now we've got this white guilt thing going on. And we're worshipping instead, and not just white people, a lot of people now worshipping instead the most primitive superstitions. Now, perfect example in Davos this week, Switzerland. Every year it happens, the world's elites gather in their private jets, hundreds of them. Tycoons, celebrities, Al Gore, Greta Thunberg was there for a couple of them, I think, politicians, Bill Gates, to discuss the world's problems. This year is the opening ceremony.
Why should I?
God knows what culture she's from, but I'm guessing it's going to be a poor one if that's how they carry on. Seriously. Davos once held big talks about the COVID virus, wearing masks, all that, and now it's perfectly fine for some medicine woman or shaman or whatever it is, or a witch, I don't know what she is, to come blow supposed magic in their face. Where are things going? After the break, we've got something very strange to report on American politics. It's all about Trump, because the President Joe Biden has almost vanished. Hasn't had an event at the White House in weeks. What's going on? I'll talk to Peter Doocy, who happens to be the straight-talking White House correspondent, Fox News, the man who really gets under the president's skin. You're a stupid son of a... Today, a warning about our economy and the mishandling of it. It's going to hurt us. The unemployment rate today, no change from months ago, still 3.9%. You think, okay, that's all right. It's still low, fine. But then you'd miss the warning in these figures. Because you look closer, 100,000 full-time jobs were actually wiped out in the last month. Now, it's true, more part-time jobs were added, but fewer than half the full-time ones that were lost. And part-time job does not compensate for a full-time one. And monthly hours worked overall, that went down 0.5%. Now, the only reason the unemployment rate didn't fall too is that it didn't go up as well. More people just dropped out of the workforce. And that's a struggling economy, I'm afraid. Excuse me. And what's the government doing meantime? Well, check out this guy. He's quite pleased with himself. It's Tony Burke, Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. Tony Burke is still formally of the Labor right. Yet I first met him decades ago when he was helping to defend Cardinal George Pell from false claims, doing research in the trenches. I'm going to cough again. Sorry. I need to bring forward the whiskey with a mate. Anyway, but look what he's done now. He needs to appeal to the Labor left because he wants to be leader, right? So he dropped Pell like a hot potato and rammed through all those pro-union anti-employer laws. No wonder productivity keeps going down the toilet. as you saw today. Well, today, Burke finally got involved in a waterfront dispute that's been laying freight at many of our ports since October, costing the country $84 million a day. He met port operator DP World and the Maritime Union, which wants workers who average already about $130,000 each to get a 16% pay rise over 2 years. How nice would that be? Now, DP World wants the government to let Fair Work Australia settle. It's like a judge would on the evidence, but the union does not. Why would that be? And big surprise, Tony Burke today was again on the union's side. Said no way is he going to intervene. No way is he going to get this to Fair Work. He even smeared the head of the DP World personally as, you know, some sort of hypocrite that doesn't want the best for Australia, and suggested the company was just being greedy and unfair.
I think Australians are sick to death of having highly profitable companies say everything is the fault of them having to pay their workforce the same as their competitors.
Joining me is Nationals front bencher Barnaby Joyce, the former Deputy Prime Minister. Barnaby Joyce, is Tony Burke right that, look, the bosses of DP World should have just negotiated with the unions directly and not come crying to him?
No, we are an island nation. We don't have railway lines into Singapore or railway lines into Europe or a road into Houston and Texas. So the ports have incredible powers. Now, I don't know whether your listeners know what sort of money these people are on, but the Maritime Union of Australia is it is good at its job at getting people paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. It has the highest paid workforce where you can't get in unless you're a union rep. In fact, in many instances, you can't get in unless you're related to someone who's already working there. It's like a little unionised royal family. And Tony Burke has gone out there to defend them. Now, I suppose they're entitled to fight for even more money. They're on a lot more money than the vast majority of all listeners, the people watching this. Believe you me, they will put you to bed with the money they're earning. But they also believe it's their right to hold up our nation's commerce. If we don't have those ports operating, we all become poorer. Because look at what you're wearing, your shirt, your car, your fuel, look around your kitchen where I am at the moment. It's all coming on a boat from overseas, and the only way we make money is when we put stuff on a boat and send the other direction. And these people are closing down the boats.
Yeah, I mean, Tony Burke's cheap shot. Oh, well, they should be paid as much as they're being paid in other port, by other employers in other ports. Yeah, but the point is, Patrick's, who's talking about, they can do that because they've got better workplace productivity rules in place. If the workers want to give up, do that as well, fine. But if if you want to drive your employer broke, go your hardest, and we'll all suffer. Barnaby, I want to go back to the earlier issue I talked about tonight. The government's saying Ukraine can't have our Taipan helicopters, they're too unsafe, and it would rather bury them in the dirt than hand them over. Fair enough?
Outrageous. I mean, imagine it was the Styres, and we decided the Styres were better buried in the ground than defending a democratic country from basically a new form of totalitarian imperialism where they just invade you at their whim. We are going to bury a helicopter. If it's not perfect, I tell you what, it's better than having to walk out and meet your enemy. It's better than having to walk back. Even if it crashes, it's probably better. Your odds are better than what's going to happen to you. You get shot to pieces because you just don't have access to the front line. Now, the risk to us, well, our alternative to this airframe, rotary airframe, is to bury it in the ground. And, you couldn't, Andrew,
like
you couldn't write about this stuff. It is barking mad. And it's yet another metaphor for what this government's about. It is just, it's lunacy. It's lunacy.
Barnaby, for me, it's not just that it's a bad decision. It's a lunatic decision that they can't explain. And it's going to this picture now of a government that is irrational and simply incompetent, worse than Whitlam, as I predicted when they first got elected. Barnaby, just quickly, your wife, Vicky, says she went to buy a new ute for your farm this week. Hit a problem. all caused by the climate change minister, Chris Bowen. What happened?
Well, we've got this new nirvana. We're running around chasing Europe. I'm very blessed. We've got about 9,000 acres here. An average farm in Europe is about 50 acres. 50 acres. Now, an electric vehicle or one of these new vehicles is just not suited to the work we do, whether it's carrying chemicals, whether it's carrying spare parts. And we're not as big as grain farms. They are going to bring in a new fuel standard for which you cannot buy the vehicle that new fuel standard uses. It's unbelievable. We rang up agents and they said we just don't sell them. So we've got a new standard. See, the almighty Chris Bowen and the great new virtuous cabal out there in Canberra. They've got the brief from the department. Oh, we'll do this. This is great. This will work in Annandale. Here we go. Sign it up. And then out here in the boondocks, we go, well, let's try and buy one of these things. You can't. They're not for sale.
Mate, that is such an example of a policy dreamed up in the unreal world in a little bubble in Canberra with no relationship to the real world, to the farmers and tradies out there that need your utes. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Barnaby Joyce, lovely to speak to you. Talk to you next week. Thank you. It's so weird. Chris Bowen keeps telling us he's doing all this to make us buy more electric cars. He wants 90% of the cars we buy in just 6 years from now electric, okay? And yet we keep getting evidence they're not actually anything as good as he claims. I'll give you a new example. Two guys from carexpert.com.au, they review cars. They drove two of the top-range BMWs, right? The 17M70 and the 740i. One's electric, one's petrol, and they drove it from Melbourne to Sydney. And they worked out something really weird because not only did the electric version cost an extra $70,000, I said top range, $70,000 more, it also needed 3 recharging stops to Sydney, totaling 2 hours of wasted time sitting in your car. The petrol car didn't need any refuelling, by the way, none, it could go non-stop. And by the way, it cost $17 more to charge the electric car on the way than it did to fill the petrol car for the trip. $70 more. I mean, what does that tell you? Well, you're being conned. As electricity prices go up, they'll make less sense. And by the way, most of electricity is still made from fossil fuels. So where is the sense in this? Now, America. I mean, if you want something really weird, go to America too. There's an odd thing. With the US presidential election, right, it's just 10 months away now, the media coverage is dominated by stories about Donald Trump, who's the likely challenger, and it's almost nothing about Joe Biden, who actually is the president right now. It's like the election is about whether voters want Trump or not. It's not about whether Biden deserves a second go. It's like the invisible president, not there, a non-entity. He's the absent president. In fact, that could almost be literally true. Because you take the last month, the 81-year-old leader of the most powerful nation on earth has taken 4 short holidays over that time, plus weekends, not held a single White House event so far this year, which is weird when the US is now facing 3 hot wars at the moment, Ukraine, Gaza, Red Sea against the Houthis, and when Iran is fired at or near a US consulate in Iraq this week. So what's the story with this president? Let's cross to Peter Doocy, the Fox News White House correspondent, is following Joe Biden at the moment. I've wanted to talk to Peter for a while because no other White House reporter can cut through the White House spin so clearly with just one question. I'll just give you one example. Peter questioned the White House spokesman about Biden's boast on stopping inflation. He's done it. And also a hint of what Joe Biden thinks of Peter's scrutiny.
On lowering prices, you said earlier that the actions the president has taken have worked. So is it your sense that when people were home for Thanksgiving, catching up with their family members, they were saying to each other, can you believe how much more affordable things have gotten?
So honestly, I wouldn't, I hear the question, but I want to make sure this is very clear. We take that very seriously.
Will you take questions on inflation then?
Let's move. Thank you. Thank you all.
Do you think inflation is a political liability?
Talent's a great asset. More inflation. What a stupid son of a...
I talked to Peter Doocy a short while ago. Peter Doocy, thank you so much for your time. I see you've had to pull over. You're chasing down the president, which comes to this point, actually, because I see Donald Trump at this end of the world anyway, making constant speeches. I see him constantly campaigning. I see him constantly in court making speeches and etc. But I don't see Joe Biden much at all. What is he doing?
It's been pretty extraordinary, Andrew, because we're almost 3 weeks into the new year, which is an election year, and the president, Biden, still has not had any official events, any public events at all at the White House. And I've been with him the whole time since Inauguration Day. That's very unusual. He does have a few stops in swing states. We saw him pop up at a business in Pennsylvania. He's going to be here in North Carolina tomorrow to give remarks in a electorally competitive place later this year. But nothing at the White House, despite everything that is going on. And so that just seems to be the strategy. They want to show him out and about and not at the White House. Maybe it's a way for them to look forward as opposed to look, hey, there's the guy in charge of the policies that maybe are not very popular right now, according to the polls. But there has not been much to start the year, at least.
Yeah, but I don't quite get. There's a reality behind the spin, of course, because I notice from your reporting that he's taken, about 4 short holidays over the last month and a bit. He's taken weekends off, of course. I know it's been Christmas and all that, but still, you've got several hot wars going on in the world for a start. Does this guy look flat out?
Well, it was kind of weird because the year ended, 2023 ended with constant warnings. I sit there in the briefing room listening to them talking about how there is great urgency to fund the wars in Ukraine and in Israel, or else things are not going to go the way the U.S. wants. But here we are, like almost a month later, 3 weeks into the new year, and there's no movement on any of it. And it's not just because things are all jammed up on Capitol Hill. President Biden hasn't given any meaningful remarks about any of it. They are choosing not to focus on really any of the big, heavy issues. It seems to us like they would rather just have the Republicans kind of start their nominating process, let Donald Trump suck up all the oxygen. There's a piece in the New York Times today that they would rather have Donald Trump as their opponent because they think that he is the weakest, even though pretty much every poll that is out there right now, except for one of Pennsylvania, has Trump with a noticeable lead over Biden if the election was held today.
Do you trust those polls?
No, I don't think so. And it really does seem like it's so early and so much is unknown. People in the states just have not been paying attention yet. There are some very motivated Republicans in these early states like Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, who have been paying close attention. But right now, people are mostly focused on like the American football playoffs and flight delays. Those are the two big things coming out of the holidays that have been chewing up all of the attention among people, much more than politics this time, which, again, that's unusual. If President Biden was out there campaigning, we would be there covering him. We would be talking about it. And he just hasn't been doing it.
But this goes to my point, really, doesn't it? That the election seems increasingly not to be about Joe Biden so much. He's trying to absent himself. It's like the President Chancey is just being there. He doesn't want people to actually look at him. It has to be about whether or not you like Donald Trump. It's really weird. But looking at President Biden, 81, is this the man who could do the job of president for another 4 years? And aren't Democrats getting a little bit worried about exactly that question?
Well, publicly, you won't hear anything really from any of the prominent Democrats. And privately, a lot of them concede that it's too late to really change course. Their only option is if, for some reason, President Biden has a health problem or a moral crisis and decides he is too old and he wants to step aside, they need to do something at the convention. That's not until this summer, though. So they are, and also nobody has really been running an effective shadow campaign to be the person that slides right in if there is an issue at the convention or by the convention. And so he's 81. He's got a lot of problems politically. His age is not one of the problems that he can do anything about. And unfortunately, even though about 3/4 of people polled, anytime that they poll it, think he is too old for a second term, he's not getting any younger, and he won't before the election.
What is his big pitch for re-election then?
That he is the only one who can preserve American democracy. They're running less and less on issues of the economy because even though they do pick some statistics that they think are favorable to their side over what Republicans are proposing and over what Donald Trump did even before the pandemic kind of wiped out everything economically, they think that January 6th is proof that Donald Trump is a danger to the American system. And we expect to hear a ton more about that. That really is everything that we hear behind the scenes, what they want this election to be about. Joe Biden, pro-democracy. Donald Trump, anti-democracy.
Well, there again, it's about Donald Trump. The election's about Donald Trump and a president who isn't
Absolutely.
there. Just lastly, Peter, I showed some footage at the top, of you having one of your many terrific little stand-ups against the White House press spokesperson, and then President Biden's frank and fearless hot mic assessment of your kind of questioning. I've loved it. I think it's terrific. But being a Fox News correspondent from a conservative news outlet in a White House press corps that probably leans pretty much left, how tricky has that been?
I think the trickiest part is just getting Biden's attention and getting in front of him. Nobody's ever going to be happy necessarily with everything that we are asking about because they all have editors too. They need to cover topics maybe that they're more interested in than we are. The toughest thing, though, kind of to everything that we've been talking about, Andrew, is that there are fewer and fewer opportunities to get in front of President Biden. The first year that he was there, we had a lot of opportunities. The second year, a lot of opportunities. The third year, fewer. And this fourth year so far, barely any. And so we hope that changes. There's a lot that we want to know about his opinion concerning, but it's getting tough. And we don't really know why. We have a lot of guesses, but we don't really know why that is.
Well, I think conspiracies rush in where there's a vacuum, and some of them might actually be on the money. Peter Doocy, thank you so much for your time. We look to your spots on Fox News with great interest, and keep on plugging away.
We will. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Penny Wong's visit to Israel. It's just got even worse. We'll talk about that after the break with Michael Kroger, who is in Israel. Foreign Minister Penny Wong on a trip to Israel is trying to pretend the Albanese government's even handed in this war between democratic Israel and the Islamist Hamas terrorists. But again, just now, Wong refused, to visit the sites of the massacres of the Jews by Hamas that started this war. No time, she said. But did visit sites where Palestinians told her Jewish settlers were violent to them. Go figure that. Join me from Hostage Square in Tel Aviv is Michael Kroger, regular Bolt Report commentator and former president of the Victorian Liberals. Michael, where are you now? What are we looking at here?
So I am in Hostage Square in central Tel Aviv. This is a mock tunnel set up by the families of the Jewish hostages and ex-hostages based on the testimony of those that have been released as to what they look like. Concrete and metal, hundreds of miles of these tunnels that they've discovered. And people can visit and just see what the conditions are like. And I'm just going to turn the camera around, Andrew, if we can, just to show you the rest of Hostage Square, where the families have set up tables, the chairs, and there's very large numbers of people coming here during the day. to express their sympathy with the families of the hostages, Andrew.
Well, not much sympathy for Jews at the moment, I'm afraid, Michael. There are in some parts of the country, I'm afraid. We've got to remember, of course, tunnels like that, there's 500 kilometres of them under Gaza, built by the terrorists to hide from bombs and all that kind of stuff, built with the help, in part, of aid money. And Penny Wong's just given $21 million extra of aid to Palestinian efforts, including UNRWA, the United agency that works over there. What do you make of that?
So, Andrew, Penny Wong's made a complete fool of herself. I mean, what they've worked out here is if you work out how much concrete's needed for those tunnels and how much metal's needed for 500 kilometres of tunnels, it's about 15 billion Australian dollars. 15 billion Australian dollars. Hamas have been in power just over 15 years. The Palestinian leadership in Gaza have stolen 1 billion Australian dollars a year from the international community and the UN. Never been accounted for. No one's ever said, where are you getting all this money from? They've stolen $1 billion Australian dollars a year, including, of course, from Australian taxpayers. So if Penny Wong thinks she's got any kind of, she said to the Palestinian leader in Ramallah the other day, "Oh, please make sure that our money, is not stolen." And he said, "Oh no, it won't be stolen." Oh, please, Andrew, this money will go straight to Hamas, like the other $1 billion a year they've stolen from these dunces in the international community who think this aid is going to the UN, to the Palestinian people, to the children, to the hospitals, to the schools, to the needy. No, Andrew. 15 billion has been stolen by the Palestinian leadership and used to build these tunnels behind me. So if Penny thinks she's doing any good here, she has made a fool of herself. And people here in Israel today are just nodding their heads when you talk about the Australian contribution.
Yeah, well, Michael, let's not forget she was asking the Palestinian Prime Minister not to steal the money. In fact, they've got no control over what Hamas does in Gaza, so he can say all he likes.
No,
wouldn't help anyway.
Well, Hamas likes
Thank you so much for all your effort this week.
Hamas wants to kill him. Thanks, Andrew.
Exactly. Good on you, mate. Yeah, another mystery today. I really don't know why Brittany Higgins and her boyfriend keep posting on social media about how they're living it up in France. Not just the foreign holidays overseas, but in France, their new home in a tiny French town. Higgins has now posted on Instagram pictures of herself walking in a romantic village, visiting Paris, sharing a lovely dinner with a boyfriend in their new home, and just seeing the sights, all up on Instagram for all to see. Joining me is the panel, James McPherson and Liz Storer, both on the Late Debate here on Sky News at 10 p.m. Now, Liz, the reason I think this is a mistake is that anyone seeing this very envious sort of lifestyle is going to think, hang on, that's almost certainly financed by the $2.4 million that the Albanese government gave to her after an alleged rape in Parliament House that's never been proven, and the alleged bad treatment she got from Liberal bosses afterwards, they deny, and apparently she's told untruths about, to judge from her evidence of defamation trial last year. So, raises the question, doesn't it? Why did the Albanese government give her this fortune?
Why, indeed. Andrew, this has always looked to me like, and I understand this is a very cynical view, it's always looked to me like a payout from the government for a job well done. Let us never forget the extent to which this story, who, by the way, as you've rightly pointed out, has never been proved in a court of law. It is all still allegation upon allegation. Let us never forget how badly it was weaponised, to the extent that Morrison himself was so severely gaslit, he apologised to Higgins on the floor of the Parliament himself.
I know.
It was absolutely shambles. But we should have that election over again. We'll never know how it might have gone.
Well, Liz, the point here, and James, the point here is that every time they do this, people get envious. They think, how can they afford it? And they think, yes, the Albanese government. They're not doing the Albanese government any favours. The crime must go up, an inquiry into why that money was handed over, true or not?
Absolutely. I noticed that Katie Gallagher follows Brittany Higgins on Instagram, and her heart must sink every time she sees one of these posts, because we see them enjoying their life in France and we're not all thinking, oh, what a beautiful Paris day. How lovely does France look this time of year? We're all thinking, how much did our taxpayer dollars contribute to this lifestyle that they're living? So for the sake of the government, Brittany should stop posting, but I'm glad she is, because it keeps this at the forefront of Australians' minds.
I totally agree with you. Hey, Liz, Woolworths has banned the sale in its supermarket of anything related to Australia Day. It says it wants to respect customers that don't feel about that day as you and I would. It doesn't respect people that actually want the merch. But anyway, it's already, despite all that, celebrating the Chinese Lunar New Year, which starts next month. Is that hypocrisy, or are we not comparing apples with apples?
No. Well, we absolutely prioritise minorities in this country when it comes to Woolworths, Andrew. I mean, on top of this, just today, 2GB had an exclusive regarding Woolworths' reconciliation plan published last year, which says that they will be displaying Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags outside of their stores starting January 2025. I said it last week. The two major shareholders of Woolworths are BlackRock and Vanguard, and the weaponisation of the corporates in Australia is coming more and more to the fore, Andrew, as we see these massive behemoths who control so much of the world actually making their agenda known. What on earth do we need the Aboriginal and the Torres Strait Islander flag flying outside our supermarkets for? And notice their reconciliation plan says nothing about flying the Australian flag along with the other two.
Yep. We'll be watching on Australia Day. I mean, it reminds me of that Kipling poem about people that praise every country but their own. So this type has been with us for many years. But James, meanwhile, the Catholic Church's most senior cathedral here, St Mary's in Sydney, says it will be celebrating Australia Day at the cathedral almost non-stop on that day. Why is that the business of the church, do you think?
The fact that you ask that question, Andrew, shows just how Christian you really are without realising it. Where did you get the idea that religion shouldn't be involved in absolutely every aspect of life, except that Jesus said, render to Caesar what is Caesar's, to God what is God's? Prior to him saying that, there was never any conception that religion and the state should not be absolutely intertwined, which is why secularists make me laugh when they argue about separation of church and state, not realising they're using a principle they learned from Christianity to undermine Christianity. But it's right that the church would celebrate Australia Day, firstly because we're Australians, even though we are Christians. Secondly, because the freedoms we enjoy in this country are not accidental. They are the result of a Judeo-Christian ethic. And third, because the Bible teaches even the Jews, when they were in captivity, they were to work for the peace and the prosperity of the place in which they found themselves. And that's the responsibility of all Australians. Christians understand that very well.
Well, well spoken. I think probably that the church has recognised in the persecution of the innocent George Pell that the enemies of the church are the same ones who are the enemies of Australia Day. And it's, we'll all link arms together, or hope so. Thank you so much, James McPherson and Liz Storrett. And just quickly, I mean, take it from me, my tips for every Thursday. Second-hand bookshops, I highly recommend them. I love the one in Dunkeld, in Bowral, Echuca. I bought one now in Crocodile Land. It's by Ian Idris. If it still had its cover, it would look like this. It's about crocodile hunting with Aborigines, by the way, too. Astonishing the characters that come out of, that built Australia. It makes you fall in love with the country. And also, Ian Idris, that guy's disappeared, right? He served in the Light Horse. He died in 1979. He'd written 56 books, millions of copies sold. He was so popular, got an OBE. He served in World War I with the Light Horse, was a crocodile hunter, rabbit poisoner, miner. He knew the Australia that we're reaping the benefits of now. And he wrote about Aborigines, still back then living some of the in the old ways, and described them too before lying became polite. Described the Aborigines he met, their the good points and the not so good points. You don't see that much now. So I recommend Ewan Idris, the disappeared author. Go get it, and country bookshops. And finally, Whiskey of the Week, an affordable one, Talisker 10, value for money, pleasure for price ratio, excellent. It's just under $100. And I want to give you a tip, a secret. I drank this first over the lock behind Talisker in the Isle of Skye, eating oysters. This, with oysters, you'll thank me. You will feel like a millionaire. Oysters, Talisker whiskey, 10 years. That's it from me. Sharry Markson up next. Good night.